And I want to jump now to introduce you all to our amazing, illustrious speaker, Martha Burgess, who also goes by Muffin. I won't take a lot of time with introductions because I sent you all her bio, and you can see the amazing background that she has, and she's been honored by having mentors on the O'odham Nation to learn many of the things and many of her skills and knowledge firsthand. But I did want to share that my first encounter and experience with Muffin, I told you I was going to share this, was back in might have been 1980, spring of 1980. And I was a docent at the Desert Museum. I was a student at the university, an intern at the museum, and Muffin was teaching the collection and processing of prickly pear fruit. Take yourself back to when you were 18 or 19. And if you hadn't been exposed to those things, how inspiring they can be. Frankly, I know she's influenced my life because of that experience and opportunity. And I remember her fondly and love her to this day for that. And she's still doing, so think of all that time between then and now, she's only continued to expand her knowledge and expertise in ethnobotany of our beloved Sonoran Desert. So she will share a PowerPoint program, and hang on, because she's also got some physical show and tell. And then we'll have some questions. And because we're getting just a little bit later to start, I'd love for y'all to be able to hang on. Maybe we'll go a little bit after the hour at 7, just to make sure to get everything she has to share. Muffin, you're on.
Thank you so much, Trika. It's just, I'm humbled by what you're saying and honored for sure. It is incredible. It's awesome what you all are doing, every one of you as stewards, I mean, sharing your knowledge as well as being monitors, but just being there is so important. I'd like to start by saying that I so deeply appreciate being able to live and work and study and enjoy the native land of the Tohono O'odham. Here we are all appreciating their desert, the original First Nations were the ones who first utilized, well, actually it goes way back here, doesn't it? At least 11,000 years. It's not just the Hohokam, but I wanted to acknowledge the people who live in O'odham Juot, the O'odham land. So we're going to go through a number of plants on Tumamoc, plants that have been used and known and loved and needed by native people for probably 5,000 to 7,000 years here, ever since the desert sort of moved in. And so hopefully you can go home with a sense of diversity, among other things, the biodiversity and the diversity of nutrients available to people and animals in the Sonoran Desert. We're in a larger community. We're not just in a human community. And the diversity of the people who have known the plants, the diversity of relationships. And the O'odham have known the plants in certain ways, but there are other people from here, the Apache, who know these plants in completely different ways. And now I would encourage you to read Wendy Hodgson's book, Food Plants of the Sonoran Desert, because she brings in traditions way beyond the Tohono O'odham, especially them, because they know the Sonoran Desert the best. But the Apache and the Kokopah and the Kawila and the Kumeyaay, and I mean, so many native groups, humans, Yaqui, Opata, Seri. Anyway, it's a richness of cultures and a richness of awarenesses of these plants. They don't all see the plants the same way, and I'll touch on some of that as we go through. So, okay, I'm going to share my screen and dive into PowerPoint, and then hopefully we will. Okay, dun, 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 dun. Okay, the system is working.
One thing, Muffin. Muffin,
Yeah.
can I say one thing? Muffin and I talked about this before. If you have any questions during this presentation, raise your hand. I'm paying attention. Actually, if you could electronically raise your hand. But Muffin does like the interaction. So you are welcome to ask questions during, and you could even unmute and speak up if you need to. Is that correct, Muffin?
I know. And it's so much more relevant when you can ask the question right while it's hot in your mind, and it's probably on the minds of other people too. So go right ahead. Okay. Can you see that with your gallery view? I don't know. I wanted to say that much of what I've learned was given to me by Juanita Ahil, an elder whose traditional harvesting land was, among other places, the west slope, the west Pahitach of the Tucson Mountains, what's now Saguaro National Park. And in fact, I met her there, and we spent a good deal of red tape time getting her family to have permission to harvest on Saguaro West. It was an interesting process, but she was definitely grandfathered in. So I honor her as my mentor and teacher. She took me under her wing, and she began to make me say things. And so I'm going to do the same for you. Even if you're muted, I want you to repeat because most of my slides, I've tried to give the autumn name first, because these were the names that were first used and interacted with these plants. The people spoke to the plants with the names that I hope I can share with you. And Juanita would shove me on my shoulder, and she'd say, "You say it." So Hashan, this is a Saguaro Hashan, you say it.
Hashan.
Hashan, all right. Okay, I debated whether I should take you on a tour from the bottom of the hill to the top, but I decided I can deal with that as I go along. I'd rather take you through the seasons to carry you from now in the winter, the drab kind of dry winter, through the spring, summer, dry, arid forest summer, the monsoon, and into the fall and back to winter. And we'll touch on what would be harvested at certain times, what to be looking for when you're hiking the hill or interpreting for the public on the hill. Okay, so Juanita called barrel cactus fruit, well, the barrel cactus itself is jiawo. Jiawo, you say it. Jiawo. It means kind of like a dust devil, because of the way that the furrows, the spine lineation twists on the compass barrel. So Juanita called this her desperation food. It was stored on the tops, the tips of the barrel cacti for all season long. I mean, they're producing flowers in August, their fruits are ripening in the fall, and they remain on the plant ripe and ready for the picking well into the winter and into the spring. So there they were, no need for refrigeration. It's good food, but it's not the preferred food. If you had a storage, if traditional people had stored enough food, they wouldn't need this until like a dry spring or winter, the way we had experienced till yesterday. So the nutrition of this is significant too. The rinds themselves have all kinds of good citric acid, good vitamin C, and vitamin A. The seeds themselves have good edible oils and proteins. So it was decent food. Another plant that you'll see, this is all over the lowest part of the Pahitach of Tumamoc. You can see it along the road as you're just beginning to climb. And looking out across the creosote Pahitach, you'll see Apuntia lepticollis, Ari Weepnoi, the little pencil cholla. Weepnoi refers to the true pencil cholla, but this one is lepticollis. And it has persistent fruits, the Christmas cholla so-called, because they turn red about the solstice, winter solstice time. And if you can get through the little glochids at each areole, the little bumps on every little fruit, if you can get through that, it's a sweet treat. Complex sugars, complex carbs, again, edible oils and protein in the seed, but it's just a little treat. It's not a staple.
Is there an autumn strategy to get through those little glochids on the fruit?
Usually picking is with a tongue made out of a split saguaro rib. Like Juanita called it wawo, papago chopsticks. And she would twist them off and rub them in the soil, rub them back and forth on the ground. And that easily removes the glochids. You're always going to end up with a couple of them in your gums, but oh well. Okay, if the rains persist through the winter, there are going to be the blue dicks coming up, that little onion, kind of a nodding onion. Hot is the name, hot. You say it, hot. The blue dicks, Diclostoma. And so the bulb, once they saw the shoot coming up, that looks like a long chive with the nodding flower at the end, they would know to dig down and get the little bulb. It's not very big. It's the size of a little shallot, but good nutrition. Vegetable starches, dietary fiber, and sulfur. Okay, another thing that I just saw last week blooming on the hill in one place, Verbena goodingii, Judgotam. Judgotam. You got to get the Tumamoc walkers to say things like this. This is the Desert Verbena, and it was used as a tea for lots of purposes, among them just calming a headache, calming tension. Might be a good thing to be growing in our own gardens. That for sure would be something we should have in the gardens at the base of the hill when we start getting into that. And if the rains are significant enough in the low places, I'm not sure if this is actually on the Tumamoc grounds. I haven't found it yet, but I have suspicion that it's in the arroyo areas just to the west of the hill. This is the wild rhubarb, Iwachus. You say it, Iwachus. It's a perennial coming up from a tuberous root, probably at least a half a meter deep in usually loose, grissy soils, grainy soils. And it will emerge as a very leathery green leaf, a little rosette at ground level, and then it'll send up a stalk like pink celery. It's a true rhubarb. And Juanita would make a pie out of it. But she also would use the root as not only a dye, but as a medicine. It's full of tannins. So that's something to watch. Also on the hill, you might see chia. Can you see that on the left, the little blue balls of flowers?
Yes.
Tapk is the name in autumn, Tapk. When you see a colon, that means you draw out you extend the vowel sound. So instead of tapk, it's tapk. And tapk refers to the slipperiness, the kind of the sliminess of the seed. And this plant is, as you know from the commercial chias on sale at places like Natural Foods, it is a superfood. It's the highest per unit volume of omega-3 fatty acids. It's got complex carbs that bind with the products of digestion to balance blood sugar and mete out sugar into the bloodstream at a steady rate rather than having a boom and bust, if you know what I mean. So many of the plants that we'll be talking about today are not only food plants, but they're medicine. And it harks back to Hippocrates, that food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. Where do you draw the line? You don't. It's both. And in fact, the O'odham and other native people go see what Hippocrates was saying, even in a larger sense, because medicine has a greater significance, a spiritual significance with a lot of the plants that we'll talk about. I'm not going to relate those, but just it's worth knowing that's the spiritual medicine of some of these plants. So one of the other fabulous medicine and food plants, a staple of the Tohono O'odham, is all over the hill, all up the rocky sides. It's Giardim. And actually I put an H in there for the pronunciation, but the O'odham C is pronounced as a CH. So Giardim, always an O'odham name begins with the emphasis on the first syllable, not the emphasis on the second syllable. So Giardim. And the one that we have is Cylindropuntia versicolor, the staghorn, that looks almost exactly from a distance like buckhorn cholla. But the staghorn is the one that sheds its spines off of the buds or off of the fruits after the flowering very easily. Whereas Cylindropuntia acanthocarpa is buckhorn, acanthus meaning spiny and carpa meaning fruit, spiny fruit. And we don't have very many of those. I have not found any acanthocarpa on the hill. So the kind that we have, the cholla that we have, is the easier to harvest. It was Juanita's preferred. Another superfood. Okay, high complex carbs, complex polysaccharides, long chain carbohydrates that take a long time to digest and therefore are good for sustained energy and blood sugar balance. But the other aspect of Giardim is high calcium, available calcium. And Juanita would make me, well, she would say, yes, this is definitely for lactating moms. And she made me while I was nursing my son 100 years ago, make me eat my Giardim. And she said, you have to eat it when you're elderly, when your bones are brittle. It's good for your bones. So one of the plants that she would use for despining the cholla buds is another one that comes up in the spring, and it can be used medicinally as well. It's the triangle leaf burr sage, one of those things that people in landscaping want to obliterate. And here's this, of course, it does cause allergies, but it's got many uses. Tatshatkam is what Juanita called it. And she used the tackiness in the leaves to remove the spines on the cholla. There's a photo. Oh, you had asked about picking the little fruits on the Christmas cholla. Juanita is using her wawo, the split rib tongs to harvest the cholla buds. And just to give you an idea of the incredible nutrition of cholla, I did an analysis comparing I wanted to see if there were any difference between the yellow flowers and the other colors, because versicolor goes from a whole beautiful spectrum of color, from acid yellow to rich, through oranges and reds to a rich wine maroon. So this analysis showed that zero cholesterol, I mean, look at that, dietary fiber way up there, no sodium, some protein, but the significance is in the calcium, 25 compared with 35%, both really high, and iron, 2%. So, and then the dietary fiber is including the complex polysaccharides, the blood sugar balancers. At the same time, in March and into April, the new growth of prickly pear is happening, our Engelmann's prickly pear. And the pads, some people think of those as leaves, and the novice will call those leaves. The pads are actually stem tissue. That's an inflated stem. And the true leaves, the only time you'll ever see true leaves on cacti around our vicinity anyway, other than the tropics, are, do you see on the right, the tiny little green dunce caps that emerge from every areole, every little polka dot on that chlorophyll, on that pad. And as long as those little leaves are on the new young growth, that pad can be harvested and eaten for all kinds of goodness. You can singe off, Juanita would put it over the fire and singe off the spines, the glochids and spines and the little leaves. And in the roasting process, it would denature the hazardous oxalic acid that the plant has to defend itself against herbivores. So, and it would make the calcium oxalate into available calcium for human nutrition. Again, also blood sugar balancers, the sliminess of the mucilage, hate to use that, is it an Anglo-Saxon word? Anyway, that mucilage is the important ingredient that helps with blood sugar. So humans aren't the only ones that need.
Muffin?
Yes.
Muffin, I'm sorry. This is Rachel.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm sorry. I had a quick question. You mentioned that they only harvest the pads when the leaves are there, or is it just easier to?
That is a real good question, and I'm glad you distinguished it. Yes, when the leaves are there, that's when the harvesting of the pads happen. The pads are called nauf. In the spelling there, N-O-W-I, the I is like a blowing through the front of your mouth. Nauf. Nauf.
Okay, so that would be like versus wildlife that can eat it at any time, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And in fact, the wildlife are desperate when they're getting to this stage. And there aren't that many creatures that are able to eat it because of the oxalic acid. Rabbits, we know, have really done a job on some of the plants at Tumamoc this winter, after the drought, because there's so little left. Pack rats, javelina, those will be able to eat the pads, but it's not the favored food. It's not the first thing they go for. It's among the last.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. I wanted to draw your attention to the relative of our local prickly pear, the Opuntia engelmannii. This one is a variety linguiformis, the cow's tongue, and somebody planted it at the base of the hill, right at the entrance of the roadway. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of multiplying. I wouldn't call it invasive, but it's successful. It has the same attributes, the same nutrients as our regular engelmannii, both in the pads, the nauf, and in the fruits later. but it's not native. I don't know if that's in the plan to be removed eventually. Okay, jojoba, hahawe, with the emphasis on the first syllable. Jojoba, the word came directly from the O'odham, hahawe. And it's already blooming. I've seen it even in December, little tiny, I've seen the male buds. They take a long time to prepare, to mature and to be ready to dehisce. But the male will be on one plant and the female on another, and it's wind pollinated. When in about another month or so, if we get a little bit more rain, the male flowers, if you hit the plant, there'll just be clouds of yellow pollen. And because they're wind pollinated, they don't need to show off. They don't need to be, advertising. So about May or June, the nuts are swelling. It's a drupe, I think. Anyway, the fruits will be swelling, and I'd like to dispel some of the myth about whether it's good food. A lot of people think, oh yes, let's eat it as coffee. Well, Juanita also called this desperation food, when not in the green stage, but when they were brown and mature and ready to fall off the plant. She would actually use it as a medicine. She would crush it between two rocks and make a paste, because it's 50% liquid wax. And she'd make like a Vaseline of the desert. That same attribute, if you eat it, is going to help you evacuate most everything you have in your digestive system. So it's not a really good idea to eat. In fact, there are very few animals that eat it. Deer will browse on it, but and it's known as deer nut as well. But there's only one rodent, the Bailey's pocket mouse, that can handle the toxins that are in it. And they will cache the seeds and help to spread the jojoba. Okay, long about.
Question, Muffin,
Yes.
about jojoba. Do you know how oil is extracted? Because we know it's a popular oil that's replaced sperm whale oil. Do you know how the oil is extracted?
I have visited back when the Apache were developing an industry, because it grows in great numbers on Apache land. They had purchased presses from Germany. I mean, really high power presses. And it does take a major industrial press to get the 50% liquid wax out of it, if you're not going to, if you're going to go beyond just the crushing between two rocks method.
And does it need to be heated, or is it just the pressure that is enough to extract the oil?
Good question. It can handle a lot of heat. Actually, there's probably heat generated with the pressure extraction, but the liquid wax that comes out of it is actually used in crankcase oils and other ways that are high temperature needs for oil. So, and it doesn't break down. So it's got that advantage.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. So agaves. Oh my gosh. The nutrition of agave is so neat. And agaves, of course, you probably have read lots about this, and you may have had a program by the Fish, Susie and Paul Fish. And if any of you have not seen last Wednesday's presentation by Wendy Hodgson, you've got to go back and see that recording. It's a fabulous introduction to the domesticated agaves. And the only agaves that I know about that are on the Tumamoc property are the domesticated ones. This one is the Hohokam Agave Aot. You say it, Aot. Aot. And this one was the first to be recognized as having been domesticated by the Hohokam people. They were actually farming on the west Pahitach of the Tumamoc property, that area coming eastward from Greasewood Road and southward from Anklam. There are clusters of stones, and there are linear stone retention dams where Hohokam people, the Hohokam, were actually cultivating agaves. But this is a lesson in patience, because they will not be ripe and ready for harvest for like 15 to 25 years. So they had to have lots of them out there planted. And as you know, we've got them planted in that beautiful triangular garden as you approach the buildings at Tumamoc. It's a great place to take people to learn about them. If we allow them to flower, that'll happen maybe, well, with Hohokam Agave, it might be any time, but usually with agaves, it's somewhere around April, May, June. And with the Hohokam agave, they don't produce seeds after flowering, they produce bulbils. So they're not only multiplying themselves clonally with pups down, from their roots, from their rhizomes, but they're also producing young plants, young clones at the tip of every flower where the flowers were supposedly being pollinated. It wasn't successful. And so they're little plantlets. But I want to read you some of the nutrition that we know from a roasted agave. No cholesterol, out of, let's see, one serving being like 100 grams, okay, the standard nutritional panel. Potassium, 22% of the recommended daily requirement, the 27% carbs, 62% of the dietary fiber that we need, 3% protein, no A or C, but 77% available calcium. I mean, this is phenomenal. 20% iron, some zinc. I don't have the exact figure on that, but I mean, this is an incredibly important food. And if there were enough being planted or enough wild to be harvested elsewhere, they aren't on Tumamoc, but that was an important staple of the desert people. So into May, we begin to see the flowering of our legume trees. And we've got at least two kinds of Parkinsonia, the Palo Verdes. Pahitach is the foothills Palo Verde, and that was Juanita's favorite. We also have the blue Palo Verde, but it likes to have its feet wet, and it's a little bit more bitter seed and pod. But the acacias, we've got at least two acacias, the white thorn and the cat claw on the hill. We don't have very much ironwood. I don't remember seeing any from the road. But these are significant plants for all desert creatures, but especially they are a source of protein, vegetable protein for native people, for traditional harvesters. Pahitach, the little leaf Palo Verde, the seeds are full of protein and complex carbs. I'm gonna also give you a hint. The first week in June, usually, now with climate change, that might come forward a little bit, or like late May. But at that moment, it's just a few days, it's this short window of time where the seed pods of the little leaf Palo Verde covering the hill, they've swollen and they're sweet and green. And you can harvest them right off the tree for a wonderful, nutritious and sweet treat. Juanita would just go nuts at that point, and she would boil them sometime and to freeze them, or try to make edamame out of them. If you boil them in a brine, you can make this perfect desert edamame. But then the next week, like the second week in June, all of those little seeds will turn to a stony hardness. And at that point, you could still, traditionally, they would still harvest the seeds, parch them so they would become easily ground and made into a meal for like making flatbreads. Okay, May is the time when the Hashan, the saguaro, the giant saguaro, is blooming and feeding 18 different species of birds, and the Lord knows the bats for sure. It's how many insects. It's just a font, a cornucopia for life on the desert in that hot period. Oops, let's see. So the other plant that's blooming in May is the gui weehawk. The gui is the mesquite. Weehawk refers to the pod itself. So the flowers in May are feeding the insects, providing honey, another source of energy food. But then in, I don't know if we can you see the pods? When the pods ripen in June, they'll rattle on the tree. They turn a straw color, and they weren't harvested in the green stage until they were that dry, rattly, had that dry, rattly look to them. And so here, this is Juanita harvesting, preparing her dried pods. And she knew that you had to do it in the most arid part of the summer. And we have, actually, you probably know this, really, we recognize 5 seasons. And the arid foresummer is our 5th season. It's actually our new year. So our arid foresummer, monsoon, dry fall, wet, theoretically, winter, dry spring, dry cool, and then hot, arid foresummer is the 5th season. Anyway, she would pound the pods when they were brittle and just would snap when you broke them. And when she would dry them in the sun, she'd bring them in every night because the tissue is hygroscopic. It attracts moisture. And so the dew fall, if there's any, she wanted to prevent. So she would dry them till they're bone brittle dry, and then she could pound them in her mortar and pestle. This is a deep mortar that she had, and a stone she had at the top of her hill. She was from Little Tucson, Artichukshan. Many things were made from, and can still be made from mesquite. The mesquite is actually a hardware store, a pharmacy, a grocery store, an amazing source of many things, fuel and construction and medicine. Word of caution, if you're tasting along the way or encouraging people to try some desert foods, never try mesquite pods after the rains start, because the humidity will bring on the fungus. There are different kinds of fungi, but some of them produce an aflatoxin as frass, as their discard, and it's highly toxic to humans. It probably is to some animals too, but I've seen deer eating off the ground, but I wouldn't recommend that for humans. Okay, so the new year starts with the Pahitach harvest. The Pahitach Bakmashat, that's the moon in which the traditional people harvested the saguaro fruit. And I'll show you what Juanita has opened her fruit with. The actual dried calyx of the flower becomes the pizza cutter that can zip open the fruit, and it's highly nutritious. It's one of the few times when people would gather together and, really not orgy, but feast upon the sweetness that wasn't too available in many seasons of the year. Vegetable protein, oils in the seeds, sugars. The rind wasn't eaten, it was just the insides. Then the coming of the summer rains, the monsoon is heralded by Hohokam, which means rain spinach. Ta-da! Amaranthus palmeri, pigweed so-called, is it's what cotton farmers want to get rid of and expend lots of money on chemicals to get rid of. But you will see it in disturbed areas, any place on the hill where water might collect. Within a week of a penetrating summer rain, they're triggered by hot wet, not cool wet. The hot, wet conditions will bring them on, and that's when traditional people would have harvested the foliage. And the fresh greens are full of not only fiber, but vitamins B, C, potassium, calcium, iron, magnesium. I mean, this is a very nutritious food. It's one that we should rejoice in. And when it's available in plenty. Then as the season progresses and it dries up and those seed stalks produce a whole slew of little tiny seeds, those seeds actually, amaranth seeds, are 15 to 18% protein. It's one of the highest. They call it a grain. It's not technically a grain because grains are only grasses, but it's granular. So that's why they refer to it that way. But it's a super highly nutritious food. With the summer rains, actually with spring rains sometimes, and with the summer rains, is one of the most important plants for the traditional people. Shuki. You say it, shuki. The S is sort of a sh sound, like an SH. So it was used, oh my gosh, as a tea for anything, almost any problem that that people have. And in fact, it's still being researched as for attributes that are anti-cancer. So we're looking to the future in this whole presentation and in understanding traditional human plant relationships. We're seeing potential for our own futures and for our grandchildren's futures, and actually for a future that includes hotter and drier conditions. And the plants we're talking about are opportunists and survivors, and that might provide hope in a changing world. So later in the summer, into August and September, our iipai becomes ripe. The tunas, so-called, our prickly pear fruit, and they have many of the same attributes as the prickly pear pads in the spring, but the fruits have a little bit more sugars to them, complex sugars that make them tasty. Juanita would pick that with the wawo, the tongs, and singe them over the fire, and open them up, scoop out the seeds. But she wouldn't eat very many. And I found out why, because once I ate several large helpings of prickly pear fresh, and I thought I was going to die. Native people know this. You can read more about it in Wendy's Food Plants of the Sonoran Desert.
And Muffin, can I interrupt you for
Sure.
a question?
Yeah.
Got a raised hand from Eric. I think he's got a question for you.
Okay.
Yeah, so about like 2 months ago, that same thing, prickly pear, whatever, I decided to harvest like I don't even know, like a lot of it. And I found an easy way because I picked it with like tongs. And I found out if you put it like in a bowl and just mix around each other with some water, the thorns come off, and I was able to peel the hard layer. And then after that, I kind of squished it all together to make like to get all the juice out. I don't know if I ever did it again because it kind of tastes like watered down watermelon, but I drank like maybe like almost like a whole pitcher, maybe like I don't know, 64 ounces worth of this stuff.
Oh my God.
I mean, I felt fine, but as far as the seeds went, I mean, there was a lot, I mean, a lot of seeds. And I just threw them away. But I mean, in the future, if I ever was to do this again, should I not be drinking that much, whatever, like that much of the plant? And what should I do with the seeds next time? Because there's a bunch in my backyard.
The seeds um, can can be used. I think in some cases they were roasted and ground by some traditional people, but Juanita would toss those. Um, the pulp itself is what she would use, the surrounding the seeds. I mean, that it's not really a rind, as you say. You peeled them, that outer skin, and it's the inner pulp that's the best part. It's got complex carbs. It's got long chain sugars. Um, it's got available calcium. I do think that it's probably a good idea not to drink all of that in one sitting. Save some and meet it out, because actually, if you have a little bit through, at intervals throughout the day, that actually is what they recommend for diabetics.
Oh,
Um,
okay, because I made it last like almost 2 days, and I added some desert honey. I don't know if you know that one guy by A Mountain that sells his desert honey. I put some of
yeah.
that in there. Like I said, it was all right. It just tasted like watered down watermelon. So I don't know, but it was all right.
Um, so did you say you boiled it at all?
Uh, no, not at all.
Yes.
After I cleaned them, and then after I took out the thorns and took out the hard skin, I just kind of got like a clean shirt, and I put it all together, and I just kind of squeezed it, just
Uh-huh.
squeezed all the juice out of it as much as possible. And I didn't know what to do with the pulp or the seeds, because when it comes to desert plants, I know that you could either go to the bathroom for a long time or whatever. So that's why like I drank like maybe like a couple ounces, waited like 2 hours, nothing happened. I'm like, all right, drink the rest. But again, I didn't want to mess with the pulp or the seeds, so I just kind of let them outside and just see if any rabbits or anything would get them.
That, that's
But
probably a
yeah,
good idea to give it back to nature. Um,
yeah.
Actually, that's really interesting what you did. This is what I have done. Um, I I will freeze the whole fruits in plastic. Actually, I freeze it in a paper sack and then plastic. And then when I want to prepare the juice and pulp, I thaw it out, and it's eminently mushable in the Cuisinart. And then I squeeze it through like 4 layers of cheesecloth. And it's the most glorious color in the world. And the cheesecloth will hold back the seeds and the little pieces of skin and the glochids, the tiny little hair-like spines, and just the pulp and juice will come through, and then that can be frozen and used throughout the year if you wanted to. Um, or it can be cooked and made into jams and jellies, or sometimes I make an ice block and use it in the center of a punch on holidays. But yeah, the seeds I don't think would be good to eat. I know that Moroccans are using prickly pear that has been imported from here to Morocco, and they're using heavy duty presses and extracting the prickly pear oil out of it for cosmetic purposes. But so there are many uses, but traditionally here, I think one of the ways you can read in I'itoi's Garden, a publication by the Tohono O'odham Community Action. Francis Manuel, another one of my mentors, would make like prickly pear tamales using the pulp. Anyway, there are lots of interesting things, but it's food and it's good medicine for.
Muffin, can I interject one thing? Because I feel like you were kind of leading to the idea about not eating too much or drinking too much at one event. I know several people that have imbibed too much at one sitting, our friend Jesus Garcia being one of them. And there seems to be some kind of chemical in the prickly pear fruit juice that if one imbibes too much in a sitting, for me, I've been okay, but you get this sort of flu-like feeling. Jesus gets flattened. And I know other people that have had similar reactions. It's just something that's probably not best to eat or drink. Like you were saying, you did a whole lot at once, Eric. Probably best to take in moderation, no matter what you're mixing it with. Were you kind of referring to that, Muffin, or?
I totally agree. The time that I ate too much, my temperature went down a couple of degrees, and I knew that I had poisoned myself, and I drank a whole bunch of water and slept it off for 14 hours. But yeah, it was very flu-like, and I had chills. So I recommend being very moderate about it, taking little bits of prickly pear at intervals. And it can be beneficial that way. I'm glad you clarified that. Interestingly, traditional people have had different relationships with it, and they actually talk about, some of them even have taboos. Some native groups in the Southwest have taboos about eating prickly pear. So it's well to be wary of how it behaves in you, and not encourage people to go ape over it. Does that help, Eric? I appreciate your testimony.
Oh no, it really does. It answered some questions because, again, I don't know if I ever do it again, but if I will, now I know it's need the middle seed, and maybe I'll try boiling it next time for like a tea. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, thanks a lot. Like I said, I was really worried about if I could eat it or whatever.
Yeah, it's good food in very moderate ways. Okay, end of summer, on the hill, you'll see lots of hackberry. Right now, it's hardly visible except for its zigzag branching. Another thing that you'll see late summer are the little fruits on wolfberry. But right now, like on the left of this picture, it's pretty doorment dormant. Okay, wolfberry has branching that comes out at right angles. So you can recognize it even when it doesn't have very many fruits or foliage. Okay, late in the summer, you might see in disturbed places a wild devil's claw on the hill. And in fact, this one should be one that's in the wild relatives of domesticated plants. If you open up a devil's claw in the process of making a basket or whatever, you will see these little seeds. And if you peel back the seed coat, it's like a giant sesame seed inside, very nutritious seed. But earlier in the game, if you find a very young plant with young pods, it looks like a tiny green elephant trunk. And at that stage, before the pod gets woody, those were traditionally eaten like okra. Okay, end of summer, oh, the chiltepine, the wild chiltepine comes due. I don't think there's any record of chiltepine wild growing naturally on the hill, but I wanted to mention it. Koko is how Juanita pronounced it. The closest native stand of wild chiltepine is down the highway toward Nogales, right at Tumamoc, Rock Corral Canyon in the Atascosa Mountains on the west side of the highway is a beautiful stand. And in fact, Juanita told me that the name Tumamoc came from the word meaning the place of the wild chiltepin, the wild ka'ko. Interestingly. So the fruits have high vitamin A and C, and of course enhance almost any dish. Something that we'll see in little hiding places on the hill is Isweek, the little hedgehog, which in the spring is a show of color, late spring, and by late summer, I don't have a picture of it, I'm sorry, but it will have a beautiful spiny fruit that tastes like strawberries. In fact, the English name is strawberry cactus. So that's one to be looking for. Another one that's inconspicuous right now, on the left, the sun on the rocks makes the picture almost impossible to see, but the wild desert lavender, which was used as a tea traditionally, and there are herbalists today that use it and swear by it. It's growing in the gutters along the road, and I haven't been able to see too many in the higher places on the road where they used to be. I think the drought has really killed off several of them, but this one's in above the first turn as you're walking up the road. When the rains come in the spring, you'll see a flush of clusters of lavender flowers. The tea actually was used traditionally for settling the stomach and calming the drinker. I wanted to alert you to the chiordim. If the buds have not been harvested by animals or humans, they persist as fruit without any spines. You can see that these are spineless fruits, and that would have been another one of Juanita's desperation foods. You could roast those almost dry fruits and eat them for their lasting complex carbs. Another thing that's happening now in the wintertime is what I take to be a lesson in sustainability and resilience. It's the lesson from the Cook Pahitach, from the foothills Palo Verde. And you'll see them all over the hill looking like, is this plant dying? They're shedding their branches. They have a way of dealing with drought by first shedding their leaflets and then their branchlets. And then what's happening right now after this horrific drought, they're shedding entire branches, but it's like a knowledgeable, that's teleological, I shouldn't say that. They are dropping back to regroup. They are dropping back to support the tissue that they have enough resources to support. And I wish that Wall Street could do the same. I wish that our national and world economies could become in balance with the resources that we have available. Another a conservative, resilient little plant is the mammillaria, and it's the fishhook mammillaria. I found one that had several ancient and dried out stalks